Hello, party people. Welcome back to the drawing graveyard. Going back in with another drawing. There's a page of drawings that I did that I had a video edited for, and I didn't feel like it was quite the level I wanted to put out. The drawings are fine, they just weren't extremely exciting. It was more of like a practice page. I'll show you a picture at some point. Today it looks like we're working on some blossoms. I figured we'd kind of just do a little branch, like just kind of making a little flow. Flowers again. I probably eventually will do something other than flowers, but flowers feel like my kind of comfort zone, so when I don't know what to draw, I'll draw flowers. There's also just so many different arrangements that you can put them in and styles. I mean, there's like realistic, there's illustrative, there's that kind of like tattoo style. This one's somewhere between, I would imagine, kind of a tattoo style and a illustrative. But I think the two kind of have overlapping elements. I try not to get too caught up in labels, but here we are trying to put things in a box again. I like these little stylized edges, kind of add to that, kind of give them something that kind of stands out. It's not obviously not necessarily realistic, but it kind of gives them a flair that's really fun. I decided I would watercolor these as well. I kind of wanted to add, I like playing with color. I like a watercolor, it usually dries pretty quick. It's not watercolor paper necessarily, so the technique seems like it's always different when you're going from watercolor paper to non-watercolor paper. I'm by no means an expert, I definitely use it enough, but watercolor paper will definitely let you get that really nice blend with kind of mediocre sketchbook paper like this book is. I don't really worry about getting that kind of blending out with those really smooth blends, but I like kind of just using it as a backup accent. So these are the QOR watercolors. That top row comes with it, and then I filled the bottom row in. These are my brushes. It's got a 6 and an 8. I really like these. I think they're relatively expensive, but every now and again it's nice to spend a nice little amount of money on something that you use a lot. I'm gonna start mixing up my colors. Sloppy pour right here. 3, 2, 1, sloppy pour. Beautiful. So I'm taking this kind of cad red and I'm putting just a little bit of this forest green in it. I just want to neutralize the red a little bit so it kind of has this kind of dusty rose. I'm using pretty traditional colors. It's just like red and green. I want to play with kind of different color palettes. Red and green is my default for flowers. It's like so basic, but it's also, there's kind of something nice about the traditional. I'm adding a little bit of water. I don't want that red quite as saturated, so I translucented it a little bit just so. I feel like sometimes if it's too saturated, you don't get as much of those watermarks where the watercolor is kind of breaking up and you can see the pigment separating. I like, especially like in a sketchbook, I like that kind of loose light watercolor. And still some of the spots ended up getting kind of dark, but you'll see when we get there. This is the green. I think I had a little bit of red in the brush, so that kind of helped neutralize it. And then I put a little bit of this. I think it's an Indian yellow. I don't remember. If you really want a color list, I can get them to you, but I'm not too worried about. Once I get my colors going, I just kind of stick with them unless I'm trying to order more. I'm not super great at remembering exactly what colors I'm using. I do love a kind of neutralized green. It kind of gives it that rowdy feel. You know, leaves are rarely so perfect. Every now and again, I have a few plants in my home that have that like really green, but I feel like there's so many good variations on green that it's nice to kind of push them one direction or the other and add complementary colors. And so I decided to leave these outer edges paper white. Typically I would kind of try to fade that red out, but I figured it'd be kind of easier since this paper doesn't absorb the watercolor. It sits on top of the paper a lot more. I'd kind of figure I'd just leave my highlights out in the open. I've been starting to flirt with going back into watercolors and doing a little bit of colored pencil, which I've never done before, but I've seen a few people do it on the YouTubes, and it's been really fun watching them kind of add that texture and a little bit of color modification to the watercolor. And I really enjoy the way that it looks, but I think that's maybe the next one I'll do a little bit of colored pencil over top. I just got some. I've never really been much of a colored pencil person, and this would be a good time to kind of break them out, play with that. Because what better place to experiment than here? And that's pretty much what this is for. It's just a fun way to kind of play with different mediums, things, you know, take a little extra time on things that you maybe wouldn't, and, you know, a good motivator. This week I've been thinking a lot about like imposter syndrome and feeling like seeing other people's work and liking their work, and then looking at my own work and almost wishing it was more like theirs. I think everyone does this in different varieties of ways. I know like when I make something and it reminds me of someone else, I almost like it more, which I'm sure is some like deep form of self-deprecation. But I've been really trying to like appreciate the way things, like when I draw something, especially without reference, and for these I didn't really have a reference, I think it really pushes me to appreciate my own style. And I think the more you draw too, the more that kind of comes out, like whether you want it to or not. And I think for years I've kind of been resistant to my own style, quote unquote, you know, like just the way that you do things is always going to be your own style. I try not to put myself in too many boxes. But, you know, the more you draw something, the more you're going to kind of draw it your way and find the things that work for you. And so I'm trying to be more appreciative of when something consistently looks like a way that I draw it. It's like, okay, it's not a bad thing. It doesn't need to be this way or that, but I think it's easy to get caught up in those kind of head spaces, especially as creators, and I have plenty of people in my life that are not necessarily creators, artistic, and they feel it too. I think it's pretty common. I don't know if it's always been with us as humans or if it's a symptom of the modern day, but either way, it's something that we have to live with and kind of take in. And I think the more, especially as like artists, I think the more you can kind of accept the way that you make your work, I think it's always going to be a good place to be in. I love this little bit at the end, these little buds I really enjoy. I kind of do like scribble ovals, and it just gives this really nice like overlapping petal effect for buds. And then I kind of just draw them in, but they're fun little guys. And that's it for the base colors. I kind of mix my red and green together to get this really neutral brown. I think I ended up adding a little bit of Payne's Gray, which is my favorite blue, just to darken it up. but I figured I would use the two colors that I already used so there'd be color harmony in the piece. You know, they're all kind of speaking the same language, at least to a degree. It's always hard to get these little bits where this branch shows through a little. You don't want it to get too muddy there, you know, like you want to. I try to think about the way things are overlapping, and I don't know, sometimes just when you're drawing it just happens where there's like little weird spaces, and that's always a nice thing between digital and physical, where making those alterations are easier in digital, and sometimes when it's like if I really was pushing harder, I probably would have moved some of those flowers in the middle together, just so I'm cleaning off that green. There's a little bit of green on that yellow, so I wanted to clean it off just a little bit. Just get that nice clean yellow for the centers of the flowers. I think I would have moved the flowers just a little bit together and have them overlap a little more, but I mean, it's fine. I'm not upset about it, but I think I'm always trying to think about ways that things could change and improve. That's why it's, you know, there's never an end to making art. You're just constantly like, oh, I could do that just a little bit different. I had to empty out my goodies bag. I have all my microns in here. My little travel pencil case. To figure out which one. I think I go with the 8 and the 01. These are the microns. Standard, you know. Who doesn't use a good micron? I don't even use them that often, but I have a ton of them just because they're nice to have when you want some line variation. There's a few different ways that I've done the center of these flowers when I've drawn them before. I kind of like these little, you know, pollen balls. I don't know. I mean, there's so many different stylized, even doing the center of the flower, there's so many different stylized ways that you can kind of make that happen. It's just like how, you know, you could draw flowers all day and draw the same flower and draw it a bunch of different ways and so many different shapes and forms and so many combinations of leaves and different things like that. It's nice to have that variation. Here when you're, you know, putting the outline on, you can really see where those like color breaks really kind of pop through, which are fun. So many pointy edges. I didn't really notice that the flowers have pointy edges, the leaves have pointy edges. These little center lines are always fun. You know, it can be a make or break moment if you really get a wobble in one, but when you kind of whip that line out, it feels nice to have that kind of center moving out just to kind of give it that little bit of motion, the alluding to the curves and the way the petals are facing. I'm using my thinner marker other than the center of the flowers to kind of do these at 0.01 to outline these petals just so they have a bold outline, but then they have those kind of thinner inlines. And I like putting a little bit of that wood texture. I know it's not necessarily realistic to have that wood grain because it would probably have bark or something like that, you know, but it kind of helps give it a little bit of texture. And of course, hey man, it's the sketchbook. You got to throw the signature down. I like dating. It's the date more than anything that I enjoy. You know, when you're 10 years later, when you're flipping through your old sketchbooks, you can kind of remember where you were. And I've really thought about my sketchbook as almost a form of a journal rather than It's like I draw things in there, but it's also like a marker of time. Like I get a nostalgia throwback at the end when I'm looking back at old sketchbooks. Gotta fill it in. Give it that nice underground effect. And there we are. This is a super fun one. I've got a lot of plans and different directions that I can go in the future. So if there's anything that maybe you're specifically wanting to see me draw, you can always shoot a comment. I kind of like seeing the undersketch too. I was debating about erasing all that, but I really like the way it looks. It's fun. Just have fun out there, you know? Well, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.